Is it
Yes,
visible
it's
to
visible.
you,
Yeah, yeah.
Aishwarya?
Yes,
Right.
yes, it
Okay.
is visible.
Right. So today we are going to discuss about the design patterns in microservices, because there are different patterns which normally we use for different problems, right? So whatever the solutions we want to provide. So for different solutions and all, different design patterns will be used. So design patterns were as follows. The first one about service registry, followed by the event-driven architecture, right? So different ones are there. Now, whenever the first one, which is called service registry, wherein this service registry majorly provides the central repository, especially whenever we are discovering about the microservices, whenever, because this is majorly focusing on the repository system. What is that we are going to provide irrespective of the kind of application we belongs to, right? So irrespective of the kind of application, what is that we are developing. So wherein services to provide a central repository, this is majorly to discover microservices. The major advantage under this is to not only to identify the microservice and all, but we need to communicate with different microservices architectures, because for different components, as I mentioned earlier, as we discussed earlier, because it is loosely coupled, it's not tightly coupled, because if it is a monolithic, then it would be of different, right? So as it is a microservices is loosely coupled, wherein if you want to develop any kind of components and all for different microservices used for different components, microservices will be developed. So that communication among these microservices, whatever we are going to create, is something essentially important, which normally we do whenever we are working on whenever we are working on the service registry part. Along with this, the major advantage is to keep all the records available wherever the services we are using, followed by the kind of locations, whatever we use and all everything is what something we do. Because especially in service registry, this is uh, majorly used for us to make the records available in their different locations. Like, for example, when you have taken in, I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, if you have taken an e-commerce website, right? So let's say e-commerce site. So e-commerce site have different services. Let's say, for example, e-commerce service have an order service, point number one. Right. That's for that, there is a component, exclusive component for order services is one component. At the same time, we may have a component for payments as well, which is of payment service, we can say. At the same time, shipping service, because if customer has uh, purchased any uh, purchased any goods online, right? So any products online, we have to ship the product signals to the confirmation which customer has given payments, right? So shipping services is another component. So at the same time, customer services, because customer service is also another component, right? So assume that these are the four components we have in an e-commerce site, right? So one is order service, where customer orders goods. Second, against to the order and all, customer has to pay. That is second. And against to the payment, we do the shipping, logistics, right? So shipping and all, everything comes under the third. Whereas for the services, customer services, right? So if there is any complaints, queries, right? So all these things are comes under the customer service part. So let's say, for example, these are the four components or 4 different microservices which normally we create. But whenever we are implementing this because end of the day, communication among these components is one of the key aspect we need to consider. So whenever we are going to create a communication and all, normally, especially when we follow these design patterns, especially in reference to the service registry, for every component, there will be an exclusive API which we create, right? So because it's especially REST API I'm talking about, right? So because it has its own REST API, which normally we can create, so that it is something feasible and possible for one component which can be communicating with the different component, right? So this is one advantage we have. The next point about when we want to use this, when we are trying to create a REST API for every component which is as separate, which also makes us to which will make us to uh, easy, right? So because we want to, this will make our activity, right? Make our activity, whatever the activity we are doing, that will be easier for the services to discover each other whenever we are using it. So this is also one of the advantage wherein we can see, especially whenever we are working on the service registry, right? So as far as service registry is concerned, so because of the individual components, because of the individual REST APIs we are creating for different components, either it can be order, service, or etc., all that, right? So wherein it will make services much easier for team members so that we can discover as well as we can enable services and all everything much easier. So this is one thing we need to understand. At the same time, whenever we are setting up the service registry, whatever the kind of maintenance list we follow, right? So because the data list, whatever are we going to maintain, all these services available majorly at the endpoints, whatever we create, whenever we are working on the application development, especially in reference to the service registries itself is concerned. At the same time, whenever we usually start the service, it can also register itself where the kind of registry is followed by the priorities, which provides the starting point followed by the ending point. All these things will be done when it comes to the service registry itself is concerned. Let's say, for example, endpoint maybe an order service, right? So let's say, for example, endpoint is an order service, wherein if you want to communicate this endpoint services and all everything by registering the name details, all that. Okay, because the same order number, right? Whatever the order number we have, because order number is a auto-generated number, right? So because one person has order, customer order number or customer ID, order ID number will be generated automatically by the system. So advantage is that the same ID number can be utilized and used in different components. Either, for example, if you are working on the payments, right? So when there are any payments done by the customer online against to the goods what they have purchased and all, the same order number will be used there even. At the same time, that also used for shipping services also, because for example, a customer has paid for the goods, wherein they are expecting the goods for maybe in couple of business days. So if they want to track the status of the shipping, right? So because as it to what extent it arrives, right? So when are we able, when approximately what is the date we are about to receive, right? So for that only, even the same order services history, whatever we have, the same thing will be used even for shipping services also. Along with this, whenever there is a customer query raised, right? So customer queries are raised based on the same order ID number, what is that was generated in the beginning when person has ordered the goods. Because the same component, whatever the component we are using, especially multiple components, for example, component as order service is what we have taken. Whatever the ID number we have taken in reference to the service order ID number, right? The same order number, ID number can be communicated with different components, as in when we are creating different APIs for different components as separate, which normally happens under, especially whenever we are working on the service registry. This is the first pattern which normally we need to understand, because when person has ordered the services, even these ordering services can be used for three different reasons, as just now I told you, right? So either it can be used for the payment purposes, so that against to the order number, payment will be made, so that confirmation will be taken into consideration. So followed by the payment, whatever the order is shipped to the customer, right? So wherein it will be received in coming time. Wherein shipping services and all, the same information of the order ID number will be used equally. At the same time, if you want to see any kind of queries what customer has raised, this queries raising of queries can be used using this customer ID number. At the same time, if you want to track any kind of information, right? So if you want to track what are the queries customer has raised, to what extent it is resolved. So if you want to know all this also, even the same ID number will be generated, the same ID number will be used, and the same component will be communicating, and the same order service will also be used for the tracking about the customer queries, all that. So service registry is one of the design pattern where in this each services we can develop and as well as deploy independently, because so that there won't be any interconnect. So if you want to have an interconnect where anyway we are, for communication purpose, we are creating REST API, because whereas when it comes to the implementation, as we have a nature of microservices, as different components, different microservices we are creating. So whenever we are creating, whenever we are developing and deploying independently, majorly the service registry enables services to locate dynamically, because whatever the services we required and all everything, so that it is majorly useful for an user to understand the tracking of the progress of the goods, what is that they have delivered, right? So at the same time, if there is any customer where query was raised by the customer, right? So they want to know about the status, so that whatever the services they wants to, whatever the services they wants to see, right? So that will be more flexible, and it is at the same time, it is even possible for us to make some changes and all everything whenever it is needed, so that it won't be impacting on the other components which are interconnected, because as in we see there is no interconnect of components which normally we do, because everything is individual on its nature. So what are the components we create? So these components make development of these components and all everything will develop and deploy independently, so that we don't see any kind of interconnect in terms of the impact. If there are any changes and all everything, it won't be impacted on the other services or the components what is that we have taken. So whatever the changes we want to make and all everything will be much easier, right? So this is the first one, which is called service registry, wherein the second one is called, just 1 minute, circuit breaking. Yeah. So the second one about circuit breaking. Majorly, this is the one which will prevent the cascading failures by breaking circuit and enable applications to continue functioning. So that if these functionalities were interconnected, the major disadvantage is that if the functionalities was interconnected, if there are any changes to be made in the specific functionality which is in long run, long in terms of the functionality is concerned. This is really difficult for us to make any changes in between, because continuity of functionality, if it was not breakable, right? So if it is not breaking into multiple parts, it impacts when we are making any kind of changes and all, it impacts more on the application. So whenever we are working on the design pattern, which is called service breaker pattern, majorly it is the one which majorly used to prevent the cascading failures, wherein whenever we are enabling applications for continuing purposes, because some applications and the functionalities when we are developing the business logic is a continuous process, because requirements we used to get in regular intervals, there are some constant changes to be made into the existing functionalities, where we have to make some changes in regular intervals, right? So that is something which we have to be do with, right? So in this grounds, in this aspect, so this design pattern in reference to the microservices is something essentially useful, wherein it will be useful for us to handle the kind of faults which are occurred in the microservices architecture. So because as the functionalities are breaking into different parts, right? So it won't get impacted with other component, right? So the other functionality. So that sort of advantage where we can see, especially in reference to the circuit breaker part itself is concerned. At the same time, it is also useful to act as a safety net between client and services by protection, wherein data transformation, when the data transformation has been taken, wherein it will be safer, because the impacted changes, whatever we are changing, we are making some changes, or whenever we are working on some functionalities in terms of the changes we are addressing, it will not be impacted in other functionalities, whatever we were continuing there. Right? So this is one of the advantage where we see in reference to the circuit breaker pattern is concerned. Along with this, one more advantage is to monitor the status of the service, so that people who are working on that particular service, they can monitor status, right? So because they come to know about the status of the service which we have enabled, so that we don't see any kind of communication gap among the services, what is that we are addressing to the customer end of the day. Right? So because it has to monitor in such a way where we have to evaluate the performance of a particular service. Hence, it is there shouldn't be any kind of chance to have a communication gap among these. Right? This is what something which we have to see with, right? So this is where generally circuit breaker pattern is all about. So when we are talking about the second design pattern, especially on microservices, circuit breaker pattern is also one of the second design pattern which normally we use in microservices. Whereas when it comes to the third one, which is called API gateway pattern, right? So that we discuss in the next session. Please allow me for this week. Next week onwards, I'll continue. We will take 2 hours time, and I'll continue from next week onwards, because this week I have one workshop which I am supposed to complete. I'll complete this week, so I'll be free.
Fine.
Next week onwards, I don't have any. So next week we'll have 1.5 to 2 hour session, so that I can complete this as early as possible.
Okay. And one more thing, in the link which we have sent today, the timing is written as 10
No,
a.m.
leave it.
But
leave
it will be 11:30 only, right?
Leave it.
Yeah.
Because the time is very short, because I have completed my workshop in the morning. Immediately I thought of sending it to you. I just copied and send it to you.
Got it. I got it. Okay, fine.
I thought of editing it, but I didn't have time. Just
Yeah, that's
ignore
okay.
the
I was
timing,
just
please.
confirming.
No,
So that there should be no communication gap. Yeah.
no.
Okay.
We just follow the same link. That's it. Link
Sure,
as
sure.
usual, same time at 11:30. Same time.
Sure. Yeah.
No
Thank you
changes in
so
times.
much.
And at night 10:30 is our again solution architect. Same thing.
But today is it 9:30, right? Yeah.
9:30 I will take today, because
Yeah,
yesterday I have
fine.
not taken, right? Today I'm taking.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Today I'm taking it because this meeting link is a premium link. This one which I'm using now, yesterday. So this won't be disconnected after 45 minutes. It will continue. No
Oh,
problem. Because earlier it was a general link. It was not a paid link. Now I have
okay.
taken, because workshops length I'm increasing this for 1.5 2 hours now. So I've taken a premium link now for June. So mm, the reason why it will be continued so that you don't see any breaks in between. You don't need to reconnect again.
Sure.
That advantage, right? So
Okay.
9:30, but today's session is at 9:30. Yes. Right, Aishwarya?
Oh.
See you then. Bye.